The new MSI GS65 Stealth Thin gaming laptop's got some nice specs, including Intel's new 6-core i7-8750H CPU and Nvidia 1060 graphics. So let's find out how well it performs in a bunch of different games. Just quickly, before we dig into the benchmark results, I wanted to mention that there's two 8GB sticks of DDR4 memory running at 2400 MHz in dual channel, the stock configuration present in my unit. The laptop is also available with a 1070 Max-Q if you're after some additional power. As mentioned, this one has Nvidia 1060 graphics. All testing was done at 1080p, the native resolution of the laptop's display, with VSync disabled. With that out of the way, let's check out some of the gaming results. Starting out with Fortnite, I was able to utilize the 144Hz refresh rate of the display at around medium settings or lower. However, I thought it still ran well even at max settings. Even the 1% lows at max settings are above 60 FPS. Although they can vary quite a bit, as the game greatly depends on what's going on and what other players are doing, which also means you need to take these results with a grain of salt. Overwatch was also going quite well just playing with the bots, and at ultra settings we're already averaging above the refresh rate of the display, and the 1% lows are still fairly high too. CSGO was averaging well above what the refresh rate of the display could output. The 1% lows dropped down a lot in this test due to the smokes, but they're still fairly high at around 60 FPS on lower settings. PUBG was tested using the replay feature, but again, take these results with a grain of salt, as like Fortnite, it will depend on what's going on in the game. So the results can vary quite a lot, as shown by the 1% lows, which are quite a bit lower than the averages. I've tested Far Cry 5 with the built-in benchmark. Even at max settings, we're averaging above 60 FPS, and the 1% lows aren't too far behind the average frame rates. Dota 2 was tested using a fairly intensive replay, so this should be a worst-case scenario. Realistically, you'll probably get better results in this while actually playing. And even in this intensive test, we're always averaging above 60 FPS. Rainbow Six Siege was tested with a built-in benchmark, and we're seeing quite high frame rates at all setting levels. And while the 1% lows are a fair bit behind, realistically they're still quite high. So it should play great with the 144Hz screen. Battlefield 1 ran well too. However, although the average frame rates were fairly high, the 1% lows can drop down quite a bit during intense fights. However, to me, it still felt nice and smooth. The dips weren't too bad for me, although I'm used to playing with a 60Hz monitor. The Witcher 3 doesn't really need a high frame rate to play, and even on ultra settings, to me, it played great. However, we can improve the frame rates quite a bit by lowering the settings if needed. Rise of the Tomb Raider was tested with the built-in benchmark, and the results are alright, averaging above 60 FPS even at max settings. Ghost Recon is a fairly resource-intensive game, and was again tested with the built-in benchmark. Although ultra settings are quite low, this is always the case in this game. At very high or lower, it was more playable. Watch Dogs 2 is another fairly resource-intensive game, but is another that I personally think doesn't need a high frame rate to play. I can play this with 40 FPS averages no problem, as long as the 1% lows aren't too low, so to me it played well even at ultra settings. Doom was tested using Vulkan, and to me this was another that felt nice and smooth even at ultra settings, with a 30 FPS improvement dropping down to minimum settings. But honestly, I think the game still looks pretty good even at minimum. Shadow of War was another game tested with the built-in benchmark, and I think these results are more than enough to play the game even with good settings. Ashes of the Singularity was also tested with the built-in benchmark, and again, these are alright results for this game on a laptop, as this is a fairly intensive benchmark. Overall, I thought the results from the MSI GS65 were fairly good. In some games, we're actually able to make use of the 144Hz screen with lower settings, especially in the esports titles. If you're after better results, you could instead look at the model with the Max-Q 1070, as that's also an option. I haven't yet tried undervolting or overclocking, as this will vary between laptops based on the hardware, but I'll cover those in future videos. This is how the laptop performs out of the box, which to be honest is probably how most people will probably end up using it. So this is what you can at least expect at a base level. So how do you guys think the MSI GS65 did in these games? I've always thought the 1060 is a great choice for 1080p 60fps gaming, and we can see that here. Some games are able to take advantage of the 144Hz panel though, so it really depends what you're planning on playing with it. In any case, it can basically play any modern game quite well with good settings. Let me know what you guys thought down in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for the full review of the MSI GS65 Stealth Thin 8RE gaming laptop, as well as future tech videos like this one.